Question number 21 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 4. Chart 2 suggests which of the following about population changes in the 1990s. So chart 2 and 1990s. So chart 2 and the 90s. So we care about just the 90s. Again, we can't come up with any inference or any observation from this other than making sure that we know what we're going to have to look for. Let's just check if A, B, C, D, is it true or is it not true? It's a very binary operation. True, not true. Chart 2 suggests which is the following about 90s. Large numbers of people moved from suburban areas to urban areas. Good track. Does this thing tell us anything about demographic inversion? Do we know the flow of people, where they came from, where they moved to? All we know is the growth rate of the population and the size of the city that the growth took place in. We have no idea how the transfer of people occurred or how the inversion occurred or how urban to suburban transfer occurred. We have no idea. We don't know large numbers of people move from suburban to urban. We just don't know that. All I see is growth everywhere. There's different rates of growth, but I just see growth everywhere. Not like in A. What about B? Growth rates fell in smaller metropolitan areas in the 1990s. That's not true. Growth rates actually increased. That was at its peak. Small metropolitan areas were it was its largest growth rate in the 90s than any other era. It's not in the 90s fell, it rose, so it can't be B. What about C? Large numbers of people moved from metropolitan areas to non-metropolitan areas. Notice on how A and C are very similar to one another. A and C are targeting demographic inversion. And if you don't pick up on that, you're going to pick one of those. You're going to. If you don't pick up on the fact that this chart cannot answer about demographic inversion and how people move from one place to another, it only talks about just net growth. If you don't realize that, you're going to get this answer wrong. You're going to pick A or C, and that's just, and you have to realize that they're trying to trick you with exactly what the passage was trying to warn us about, that raw census numbers are blunt, ineffective tools to measure demographic inversion. This raw, blunt census measures of growth in types of cities doesn't tell us how the movement is occurring. So just like A bothered me, C also bothers me. Large numbers of people moved from metropolitan areas to non-metro areas in the 1990s. Maybe they came from other places. Maybe they were immigrating. I don't know. What about D? The US population as a whole grew more in the 1990s than the 1980s. Oh man, this is such a good answer. Or it's such a, I think it's the right answer because it's true that we have more, we just have sheer, answer me this. How is it possible that the growth numbers are increasing in every category? If we have a big pie chart like this, if one of these guys gets bigger, doesn't the other one get smaller as a result? It's like a zero-sum game. What one guy gains, the other guy loses. But not in this case, because every year, what's happening from the 80s to 90s? We just grew in every single category. How is it possible for every category to grow? The only possible way for every category to grow is when we just have more people coming into the country. So even though the growth rates were different and they changed, none of them were growing at the expense of another. It's not like, well, one of them grew 10%, but that means that the other one had to go down 10%, or vice versa. It's not like that. The net result doesn't have to be zero because if we just keep piling people into the country, everything's going to grow, albeit at different rates. So this is a really, really hard question. And it's a very tricky question if you don't realize that A and C mean almost like the same thing, that it's targeting demographic inversion, and we can't talk about demographic inversion for A or C because we don't know those numbers based on these statistics and census numbers. D, on the other hand, the US population as a whole grew more in the 90s and the 80s. Yes, because every single thing grew more than it did in the 80s. 12.5, 8.8, 1.8 versus in the 90s, 14.3, 13.1, and 9. Everything grew. More people were in the country, so more people were flocking into all parts of the country, and that is the reason for the percent growth in metro areas for every type of metro area. Remember, not a zero-sum game. One is not growing at the expense of the other, and vice versa. Everything is growing because more people are piling into the country. Excellent, excellent, very difficult question. Very tricky, very nuanced, very subtle. One of the hardest graph questions, I think, of any College Board test I've ever seen. Realize that you can't fall for the trap of picking A or C because just like A, large numbers of people move from suburban to urban. We don't know that. large numbers of people moved from metropolitan to non-metro areas? We don't know that. We don't know how the people moved around. Maybe everyone just keeps staying in their own spots and the cities just keep growing because population as a whole grew more in the 90s and the 80s. The answer number 21 is going to be D.